Hi everyone, Melanie here, and today I'm so excited to announce that I'm chatting with Shana Meyerson from YOGAthletica, and she's based in Los Angeles. Hi Shana, how are you doing today?
Hey, Melanie, it's always awesome to reconnect. I'm excited to be here.
Good. So I am really looking forward to this because the mindfulness of movement is a topic that's really important to me, and I have seen from your website and from our personal conversations just how important this is to you with your athletics in the past, with your yoga practice now, which is why I reached out to you personally to talk about this, because I value your experience over the years in this. And with me, it's my work as a trauma counselor. It's talking therapy. I'm a counselor, we chat. And my work is quite holistic. I believe that it's not just at the level of mind that we figure our stuff out, it's also through the body that we can heal. So I wanted to have this conversation to learn about your experiences and the wisdom that you gained over the years about how trauma is held in the body and how we can shift it through movement mindfully, hence the mindfulness of movement.
Hence the moniker. Yes.
So if I could, if you could share with my audience with YOGAthletica what that's about, and take it from there.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's funny because I started yoga pretty late in life. I mean, as far as like the world is concerned today, especially because I also teach kids, which is ironic because I didn't find yoga till just a few weeks before I was 30. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, so my first teacher was Brian Cast in Santa Monica, who at the time was a very, very, very famous instructor. And he, just a few months after I started practicing, he selected me to be one of his lead teachers. I hadn't even done a teacher training yet. And I was floored. To be honored that way, right? I was already teaching. I sort of jumped into it really quickly, but I said, wow, this is amazing. I've only been, practicing for less than a year. And he said, no, you haven't. You've been practicing your whole life. And that was just such a life-changing moment for me, because the truth is that, I have been practicing all my life. My athletics have always been a cornerstone of my life. And I don't mean to group yoga with athletics, even though my business name is YOGAthletica. Yoga is so much bigger than anything that, that would just be termed as straight exercise or athletics. But I think that, athletics is an extension of moving meditation, right? Which I might argue that for people who maybe don't feel as connected on a spiritual level to the yoga, they're getting that benefit whether they like it or not, which is that separation that the practice, let's say the asana practice, creates between your life and the mindfulness of your practice, whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it spirituality or anything. There's a clear delineation, right, between this is my day, this is my practice. But the ultimate goal is to say, this is my life, this is my practice, this is my life, and there's nothing that separates it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. That's powerful. Thank you.
It's funny. I always talk about with my students about, if you only use yoga as a tool to escape your life, it's never going to be a tool to live your life. So on a microcosmic level, okay, people enter yoga and they start in some sort of establishing pose, right? Let's say child's pose, mountain pose, something very simple, just sitting, right, in meditation. And so they start off in a super calm place, right? And then most people are going through their yoga practice and they're going through stress and elation, and this rocks, and this sucks, and this hurts, and this feels great. And their mind is like going through this whole lifetime of emotions in an hour and a half. And then they finish in Shavasana, and it's like, oh, everything's okay in the world. Right. So they start with this, oh, they go through this, then they end with this, oh. That's the microcosm. Now let's look at the macrocosm, because people are treating their lives exactly the same way. They have this chaotic block of life and they're like, oh my God, I need yoga. And by the way, if you need yoga instead of want yoga, there's a problem. Okay, it's a tool, it's not an addiction. But they have this craziness, then they come to yoga, and remember just the bookends, which is to right? Then they leave their yoga and it's back to like the craziness of their world. And so what they're doing on their mat is a complete like replication of what they're doing with their life, using yoga as just this like pause instead of the foundation, right? So the goal is if you could start, I know I basically just said this, but I'm just making it broader. The goal is if you can go from your establishing pose to your Shavasana without all those vicissitudes in the middle, then one day your goal is going to be to go from life to yoga to life without those vicissitudes in the middle. Or I could say the opposite, from yoga to life to yoga. Think of yoga as the bookmarks and the life as the, and how do we like smooth that out?
Absolutely. I have a book about a Tibetan book of dream yoga, which is lucid dreaming essentially. And it's a similar kind of attitude where if you can be awake in your dreams, be lucid and realize I am dreaming, and maintain this attitude during the day when you realize, is this actually a dream? Are you questioning your reality? Which as a counselor, I find this is actually really important, because a lot of people get stuck in a fantasy. They get lost in their narratives and the stories, to be able to question, is this actually real? And this is a practice that is, well, they call it dream yoga. It's not yoga in the sense of physical yoga, but it's nonetheless cultivating awareness of what's happening in the here and now and being present and keeping that as a daily practice.
I've heard of lucid dreaming, but I haven't heard of it in the reverse. That's interesting. And that's
a good
something
book I recommend.
practice on the daily, or?
Oh, it's hard though. I mean, I'm by no means an expert on it, but the theory is that if you can go to sleep with the intent to be awake in your dreams, and I mean, I've had lucid dreams and that's the best. I wake up feeling so inspired, and then it reminds me to be more mindful from the get-go at the beginning of the day. And that's what they say in this book. It's a way to get you in the correct mindset from as soon as you wake up, and you're maintaining that state, whether it's your waking life or your dream life.
Yeah, interesting. On the same note, but probably pretty different. You know, I only practice first thing in the morning, just as a matter of practice, and a lot of it is to, you know, establish my day, establish my mindset for my day, and get me ready, you know, physically and mentally for whatever's going to come. So, and traditionally yoga is practiced first thing in the morning. Of course, I do like sometimes practice with my clients, students later in the day, but that's not my primary practice. So I do agree that what we wake up with is largely what we're going to carry with us, right, for the next 24 hours. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that your practice is in the beginning of the day, because I just can't do it in the evenings. I'm too tired and I just can't be bothered. And I mean, I look at your videos and you're clearly a very flexible person, really flexible. You're like my dream goals of like how flexible I want to be.
Oh.
So I know with me, like with particular, like I can procrastinate, and I don't, as much as I'd love to have a daily practice, I do put it off. I was wondering if you have any particular advice for other people like myself who like, we do practice, but not regularly. We want to do it more.
Yes. So, I mean, my biggest advice, and this isn't just for exercise, it's really for anything that anyone wants to make a commitment to anything, is you put it in your calendar just as you would anything else. I mean, literally, like you and I had a plan to meet today at 11 o'clock my time. I'm glad we finally figured out my time versus your time. And it's on my calendar, right? Otherwise, I'm not even going to show up. But I don't like wake up and go, oh, am I going to hop on Zoom with Melanie or not today or not? It's non-negotiable. You're on my calendar. And I think that when we start to sort of respect our obligations to self as much as we respect our obligations to others, then that helps to solidify it a little bit. I mean, I personally practice 2 hours every day. Some days I go to the Santa Monica stairs, for example, but it doesn't matter, whatever. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. But I literally every day, like if someone calls me and says, whatever, can you work with me on Thursday? I look at my schedule and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to practice earlier than like 7 because I hate getting out of bed. So that means that, in my mind, I'm practicing from 7 to 9, from 8 to 10. It doesn't really matter. And when they want to schedule, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, my 2 hours is non-negotiable. So I'm literally scheduling my life. When I used to go to a studio, I would just put the classes that were available right in my schedule. And I just made sure that I showed up. But Melanie, honestly, the hardest thing in life, I think, is showing up. I mean, I know that's silly, but I think, and I didn't make up this concept. I've heard it so many years ago, but I think about it every day of my life, which is your best day is measured by how you show up on your worst day. And I think that if we could all pick a mantra, it doesn't matter what it is. I have so many mantras that carry me through a day, but on my worst days, that's my mantra. So you know what I do? Because I would rather lie in bed. I get out of bed, I brush my teeth, I wash my face, and I just get on my mat and start moving. And I'll tell you something, I have never once, as in ever, in thousands and tens of thousands of practices, ever regretted hitting my mat and practicing. No matter how bad my day is, it's always going to make it better.
Likewise.
So wherever that blockage is, you just need to, as soon as the thing hits your mind that it becomes a question, like, oh, should I hit the mat? You just need to program yourself. I say hit the mat. Doesn't matter if you're belly dancing, if you're running, if you're jumping, I don't know. When the question arises, I'm going to make it sound easy. It's not easy, but it is simple. The answer just has to be yes. A body in motion stays in motion. A body at rest stays at rest. So if I get on my mat and start practicing, I'm not going to like suddenly be like, oh, never mind. Right. I'm just going to finish my practice. Mm-hmm. So, that's how I operate. And, well, it works for me, even on my worst days.
Thank you. And you make a very good point about how it's easy to forget the obligations to ourselves. Like for me, I grew up like, you need to meet the needs of others and put your needs to one side. So it's easy for me to say, oh, I'll stretch later. I've got some work I can do, or I need to do this for someone, or there's other things that I can do. It's easy for me to get into a habit of putting my needs to one side. And on top of that as well, like I noticed in particular, I'm working on middle splits. With just being at a computer, I need to, it really helps. It's the best stretch doing middle splits. I did also notice though that stuff came up from my past. I was like, whoa, what is this? All right. And my legs would be trembling. And I noticed in the past that I always had resistance in doing this stretch. Even when I used to do some gymnastics, it was my least favorite stretch.
Wow.
Now I can sit with it better because of all my work I've done on myself. I can handle stuff that comes up. So this is what's partly inspiring my chat with you. Like, I honestly believe that trauma is held in the body, and then certain stretches, well, does that not mean that stuff can come up?
I'll tell you something that's so interesting, because even though I'm like a yoga instructor, I'm not a woo-woo yoga instructor. Okay. I'm very, very, very deeply into spiritual practice. Don't get me wrong, but I'm also a very like relatable and practical human. I don't like to talk on this level because people don't think or operate on that level. So when I learned about trauma being stored in the hips, I mean, to me, that was woo woo. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Right. And, but then like the more I taught, I'm like, wow, like everybody is crying in hip openers. Is it because they were told that it's that's where we store our residual tension and trauma? If anybody doesn't know, that's the theory. But one time I was working actually with a bunch of kids. They were elementary school kids, and I had a class of about there must have been about 20 kids and one boy in the whole class. Okay.
Boy.
Yeah. And
Oh, boy.
this boy was like a super incredible athlete. Okay. Most of my boys who do yoga is because they don't do another sport, or at least they do group classes. But this boy was like playing up, I think, 2 levels in baseball. And the reason I bring this up is because he was a tough guy, right? He was an athlete. And the first time that I did hip openers with this class, he started crying. And I'm like, okay, well, that's like for a boy to be crying in front of 19 girls that he has to go to school with, like that's sort of awkward, right? For him. So I put one of the kids in charge and I took him out to make sure he was okay. And I said, why are you crying? And he said, I don't know. And I'm like, okay. And so we calmed down. And then again, next day, hip openers, he starts crying. Melanie, I wouldn't believe it if I didn't see it with my own 2 eyes. This kid has no idea that trauma is stored in your hips. Now, the reason I bring up the baseball thing is eventually I talked to his mom about it because it kept recurring and it wasn't a normal behavior for, a boy of his personality. And she said that his father was one of those baseball fathers, whatever, sports fathers that pushed him so hard that she was literally divorcing him because of it, because of how abusive he was to his son or how hard he kept pushing his son to succeed. So therein lay the proof. I was like, wow, okay, I'm a believer. I'm a believer, and I've seen it with adults too many times to count. So the interesting thing about storing stress and trauma, the residual stuff, right? Because like the current stuff is in our neck and our shoulders. Everybody knows that. I mean, you look at like a cartoon of like a businessman and he's always here, right? Because hello. But even when I'm stressed out, I find, let's let that go. That's a lot more
Spinning at the computer as
obvious.
well, typing away.
Yeah. But this is super obvious, right? I think most people who are even a little in tune understand the shoulders and neck. But the funny thing about the hips is unless you go to yoga class or, some other weird stretching routines, you're never going to have to confront that. That's comfortable, right? If I don't have to look at my stress and trauma, I could just push it and push it and push it. So yeah, there's definitely some truth to what you're saying about splits and the hip opening, like opening all sorts of things.
Oh yeah. And alongside when I started my counseling training, I also started belly dancing at the same time. And for me, this was way more fun than having my own counseling, because you need to have counseling when you're training as a counselor. It's a given. And don't get me wrong, it was really helpful to establish this loving relationship with this kind, loving lady. And, I felt safe, I felt nurtured, but it felt so empowering to literally be able to shake off the stress and feel what it was like to be strong in my body and to feel feminine and all sorts. And it works in a way that just talking therapy didn't. And I've kept up that practice. And I've found that before I brought my practice online, I was seeing women in person and holding workshops, women only, where we can be in like a space where we could do these belly dancing moves, like certain tribes in North Africa, they still do this. They gather in their tents when a woman is pregnant in the group, and they have these belly dancing movements they do together, like shimmies, to help with labor. This has been an old ancient practice. It's to do with childbirth. It's to do with fertility. It's really celebrating all the feminine parts. And in my personal experience, dancing, especially belly dancing, is a fun way to release the trauma that's held in the hips, as well as feel empowered again and get your sense of power back.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the concept of power because I mean, honestly, when it comes to any physical practice, right, there's always going to be a power element, right? A strength element, even. I think that belly dancing, which I've never tried, and you just don't want to see me dance, just take my word for it. But it's such a beautiful amalgamation, right, of the yin and the yang, meaning that there is an incredible strength and in core element to it. But the yin, I mean, you can't deny how feminine the movements are, but it's such a beautiful combination, and it's rare. I mean, I'll argue yoga has the same combination, but maybe in different parts, depending on what type of yoga you practice. There's so many, obviously like an Ashtanga is going to be a lot more like yang based, and a yin will be much more yin based. But there is always that like interesting balance and dichotomy.
Could you share with me some body movement practices, not necessarily yoga, but things that you do in your body that are a form of meditation for you?
Yeah, I mean, so as far as I'll start with yoga because yoga is my thing. I would say that when I want to get deep into the more whatever hidden parts of myself or the harder to access places, for me, and it might come back to the fact that I can't dance. I'm actually sort of joking, but I'm sort of not. I don't really have great rhythm. So I know for a lot of people, like the flow of the practice, like really gets them into their mental state. For me, I've always been a pretty hardcore athlete like my whole life. So for me, inversions are the thing that are most profound for me, because you can't do inversions without focusing on inversions. You're just going to fall over and you might even die. So I do a lot of like, not just like a handstand. I do a lot of like sort of crazy stuff. But I like it because it forces me to be 100% present. And to me, that is the gift that turns any form of exercise from a workout to yoga, right? Yoga being the union of mind, body, and spirit. But I think too many people reside just in the body, and they don't really want to go deeper. They don't want to go past their edges. They just want to stay in sort of a comforting space. For me, all of life growth and epiphany is going to happen outside of my comfort zone, period. So in addition to my yoga practice, which again, I do 2 hours every morning. But on my worst day, because remember, my best day is going to be measured by my worst day. Sometimes it takes me 3 hours to get through that 2-hour practice because I don't back off. I'm not like, oh, I'm having a bad day, I'm going to do like just like a really relaxed practice. I'm like, I'm having a bad day and I'm going to finish this practice. I'm going to finish my usual practice. I don't care if I'm having a bad day. I'm not having a bad life. Okay. So I'm going to do what I need to do. If it takes me an extra hour because maybe I zone out, I zone back in, I'm falling all over the place, whatever it is, that's fine. That's fine. Check. I've got it off my list. I got to complete it. I'll always feel better when I'm done. But on the days when I'm not practicing, so once a week, I go to the Santa Monica stairs, which is where I have all my life epiphanies. I really do. Every time I finish the stairs, I'm like, oh my goodness, right? Like, I got to write this down. I got to make this video. I got to, why? Like, who cares? Like, you're climbing stairs. So, if anybody is not familiar, I'm sure most people aren't familiar, it's 189 stairs. So it's a very long staircase. And I do it 18 times usually, sometimes more. Up and down would be one. Excuse me. We're talking about 3,500 steps up and down. And what it does for me is, when you are working that hard on something physical, your mind has no wiggle room to focus on anything else. I term it extreme self-care because I think self-care is great, but there's a point where you can push yourself, and everyone's comfort zone, is going to be different, and everybody's threshold for what pushes them. It's funny. I was talking to a guy the other day and he's like, how many sets do you do? And I'm like, I just did 19. He goes, oh, I used to think that 3 was a lot, because he doesn't live here anymore. And I'm like, well, I mean, it is, it is what it is. But when you get that deep into your physicality, your mind is no longer thinking like trauma or running, right? This bad idea or running, this pain or running. All you're thinking is, oh my God, like I've got 100 stairs left to the top, or, oh, it feels nice to go down. That's all you're thinking. I think of like our minds as like the freeway, right? And like, especially in LA, I mean, I know in London, you have really bad traffic too, but we have the worst traffic in America. And you could be on the 405 freeway and there's an exit like there, like 10 feet away, but it doesn't matter how close it is. You can't get off the freeway unless the person in front of you moves, right? So it doesn't even matter where your off ramp is. As long as there's cars in every direction, you're not going anywhere. Doesn't matter. So in life, if my goal is right there, it doesn't matter if I have 5,000 things, 5,000 cars in my head that are blocking that, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, you can actually just drive down the 405. There's no one on it for some reason. And it's like, it's the same street. It has the same off ramps. It has the same direction. You're going the same place. It's the same map. But there's nothing in the way. To me, moving meditation is only going to be moving meditation when there's nothing in the way, when your mind is 100% focused on your process.
There we go. If you're in LA, Santa Monica, try out those steps. Wow, thank you. And if you're in London, you've got those steps in Covent Garden Tube Station. So there's your version in London.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Shana. That's been quite an inspiring talk with you.
Oh, thank you. It's always nice to connect. And I appreciate this opportunity. I hope we talk again soon.
Absolutely. And listen, I enjoy talking with you because you're quite clearly passionate about this. I can see in how you're talking, and me too. If anything, I would love to inspire people. There is a fun way to be more mindful, to transform yourself, to observe yourself, to meditate. And that could be simply just by being in your body and mindfully so,
Yeah, actually, if I could just say one more thing on that. As a yoga instructor, obviously my line is going to be meditation is going to be your best way to overcome whatever mental blockages you have. The problem is that for most people who don't have a meditation practice, unfortunately, classical meditation will actually set their minds like completely running in every direction. It will do exactly the opposite of what it's supposed to do until you get used to it, because it's hard to sit quietly with yourself. So yes, I think everyone needs to cultivate an actual stillness meditation practice, because once you cultivate it, it's the most powerful thing on earth. But I could also say that especially when someone's going through an extreme trauma, unfortunately, and I hate to say it out loud, but I'm all about keeping it real. meditation could actually send you deeper into the cycle that you're trying to escape instead of taking you out of it. So that's why I think that like powerful, strong physical effort can sometimes be a more effective meditation practice.
Right, it's grounding, isn't it? And that's what we need. Too many people just want to seek spiritual flight and not ground themselves. It's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. But a lot of people can relate to this. And I would also like to say, for my subscribers who aren't new to Shana's channel, I highly recommend checking out her YOGAthletica channel. And also, I started my own Patreon to show people different meditation exercises and a creative variety of ways, because yes, it can be boring just to sit and do classic meditation. So check out her website, check out her YouTube, check out my Patreon, and be inspired, be motivated.
Awesome. Melanie, I just want to say, I mean, you always inspire me. And when I'm having tough times, I go straight to your channel for help. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much for saying that. And that's why I'm excited to create another platform, which is all about healing. This is honestly what's helped me: meditation and body movements, and enjoying being in my body once again, really. So
nice.
Thank you so much.
I know you're going to do it every day. So all the more power to you.
It's fun. Okay. Nice one.
Okay. Namaste.
Namaste.